Hey, before we get into this episode, I just wanted to offer a content warning because we talk about sexual assault and abuse. We share some truly inspiring stories, but I get it if this episode is not for you and just wanted to give you a warning. Thank you. We are here today with Magie Cook on the Gravity Podcast. Maggie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you too. I enjoyed being with you and John and kind of seeing what you guys are up to and, learning just a little bit about how rich of a life you've had and how beautiful and challenging your journey's been. And so I'm really excited to have a chance to hear the full story and share it with our audience.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about kind of your early childhood. I know that it starts off kind of very interesting right from the beginning. So why don't you go ahead and share that part of your journey?
Well, definitely not normal. A lot of us often talk about how we didn't have a normal childhood, but just imagine yourself living in a compound in a third world country in an orphanage, basically, with over 200 kids at the same time, living there in dorms, and then having 68 brothers and sisters that all, were adopted. And I'm one of the kids that were adopted. And then just growing up in such an environment with poverty and lots of trauma that we experienced. And, being hungry for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. And then just being creative and trying to survive and trying to do things to feel better. I mean, I as a result, I became a hunter. I was hunting prey with my brothers out of trees at night with nets and spotlights. And we used knives. As a matter of fact, I still have my original knife I used to hunt with.
Wow.
This thing right here.
Well, okay, let me just hop in for a second.
Yes.
Tell me the ages that we're talking about that you're actually in the orphanage.
Oh gosh. I mean, we had kids that came in. We had a mother that gave birth to a baby. And I was 11 years old, and my caregiver, he was a doctor. He put me as the baby catcher, which was a horrible experience.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, I guess I meant your age. So you were from 0 to
right.
How old were you when you left the orphanage? 18. So you spent your entire young childhood and young adult life in the orphanage, and incredible, really. I mean, I just kind of have to pause for a second to think about that because, it had to be such a traumatic experience. I mean, you just started to allude to one story that by itself would be mind-blowingly, difficult and challenging for anybody, let alone a young person, an 11-year-old. I mean, tell me a little bit about kind of that trauma. What was it actually like at the time? Not really even so much we can talk about it in hindsight, but what was it like at the time for you to really experience being in that world?
Well, there's a lot of kids, so there's only 2 caregivers. And when I was little, I was paired up with an adult. And when I was an adult, I was paired up with a little kid. So, and then in essence, we grew ourselves up. And because there was only 2 caregivers, there are so many things that happened that shouldn't have happened to kids, including things like sexual abuse and physical abuse, mental abuse, and hunger. And I still like to say that they try to do the best that they could with what they had, but I still think that it was just not a normal situation to have a place with so many kids and only 2 caregivers.
And what was considered to be an adult? I mean, because you said you left at 18. So how old were you when you started to care, or how old were your caregivers?
Well, I was starting to care for young kids when I was 11 or 12 years old. So I was paired up with 2 or 3 year olds, or, even a little bit older than that.
Yeah, I mean, just to kid yourself, I mean, I've got a 14-year-old, I mean, not a time where you're supposed to have to be caring for other people like that. And so I could see how that could be just fraught with all kinds of, like you said, it's really an interesting perspective to say that, they did the best they could. Because when you're asking 11 and 12-year-olds to be adults, things aren't going to go that well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so for you, I'm assuming that maybe that's all you knew. You were born into it. You didn't know anything else. Is that true? Did that become kind of like your view of the world, or was there some sense that this wasn't right, that there was a better way? And tell me a little bit more about kind of, what your feelings or thinking was of that experience as you were having it.
Well, I certainly didn't know anything outside of the bar orphans, but we did have opportunities to travel to the U.S. specifically because our caregivers would come up this way to stop at different locations and raise funds for the orphanage. So I did kind of get to see a little bit outside of the world in America, really not necessarily even Mexico, but it was certainly, my whole lifetime there was not normal, and it was just one of those situations where I just had hope for something better. I always hoped for something better, and I remember I was so young, and I used to use my mind to visualize and think myself something else, like a superhero or somebody that had overcome, like a successful woman. I would see myself dressed in these clothes with high heels and long hair, and I think it came about because we were watching a movie, and we only had to choose from 3 movies that we watched over and over again. And I saw a leading role, female, powerful woman. And I think I kind of glued to that and said, I want to be like that someday when I grow up. And I did these things. I focused with my mind and really tried to see myself like I am today, literally. So I've become a manifestation of what I've visualized even since then.
Mm. And what a powerful thing to imagine. I'm looking at you right now, dressed in the clothes that you might have imagined yourself in, living the life that maybe you fantasized about, that you saw on TV, on the big screen, and that you simply just hoped existed. I'm struck by that, and the idea of hope. What was the initial spark for hope? Just something that was kind of in your body, in your kind of experience that maybe it existed, or was it in part because you were seeing it as you traveled? The movie then gives you a real imagery for it, but kind of where did that hope come from?
Well, it came from, number one, I didn't want to suffer anymore. I wanted a better life. And number two, aside from hope, I became sort of like a tomboy, like a tough person, because I didn't want anybody to hurt me. And so I became this strong person that most of my sisters got raped, right? And I almost got raped, but I broke the guy's nose with my hands. And this is when I was a little girl. And so I became this character, a stronger character, to say, you're not going to mess with me. And so it was a combination of the two. And it's a lot of this I had to deal with later in life to kind of balance my femininity and my masculinity, because I no longer have to be there. It's to suffer. And so when that changes, I just felt like I needed to be a certain way in order to survive, and not being put down or taken advantage or abused to an extent that I would be irreparable. But a lot of the people that I grew up with, most of them ended I'm not sure if most of them, but some of them ended up in prison or in gangs or in prostitution. And but I'm so grateful and thankful that I had this mentality that, even now people ask me, how come you're not in prison or doing drugs? How did you do it? And it's just because I had this mindset of I want to end my suffering. I have hope, and I'm strong. And my internal was I'm so weak, and my external was like I'm the strong person that I don't want to let anybody mess with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you think that came from the experience that you had and kind of what you were seeing around you, and that you then kind of used your mind and body to kind of instinctually almost choose, I don't want to suffer, I'm going to be strong? Or do you feel like in some part that's like a gift that came to you from, I don't know what you believe, but from some sort of higher power?
I think a little bit of both. I think there was an instance when I was probably 8 years old, and my caregiver, my dad came out of the clinic and he was taking care of the poor. He was a doctor. Every Sunday he would open the doors, and he came to me and says, do you see those people there? And it was a mom with 2 kids, and they had no shoes. They had really thin hair and really bad clothes. He says, you know how I can tell they're really poor? And I said, how? And he explained to me, and he kind of grabbed my head and he says, I never want any one of you guys to be to that extent, to suffer to that extent of poverty and not having anything, like literally nothing. And so he went over and gave them some money for tacos. And then I remember just looking up to the sky and thinking, like as if I was hearing or also speaking something at the same time, saying, I'm going to be somebody, something, that I'm going to come out of here, and I'm going to show that anybody that's in a situation like ours, that we can make it through.
Wow. Incredible. And so it's interesting because even with all the abuse and all the neglect and all the trauma, that there was somebody there that was still saying, with an intention of having you not, I don't know, maybe, have some level of success, even if it was just the kind of most minimal level of having basic needs. There was somebody there that still was thinking about that at all. Like, how is that to have kind of, somebody almost expressing some concern and care for you, and yet, all the kind of, abuse that was happening at the same time?
Yes. And that's really, something that, because there were just 2 of them, 2 caregivers, and they couldn't really take care of all of us. And one of the things that we struggled a lot with, and she would tell him, stop giving the money away. I don't care if you give it to the poor, because he felt like he needed to help people, the poor, because he was a doctor. But he ended up giving all the money away to them before he would feed us. And so that was one of the things that they fought about a lot. And actually, every Thursday, he would get a package from Morelia, a city that was about 2 hours away. And sometimes he would get $1,000, and you could tell because he was so happy, he was jumping. And sometimes he would just give it all away, and he was sad, depressed. And that's some sort of like money issue that I had with seeing him, how he was reacting to money, that I had to fix later on in life, strains of that. But the suffering part of it is, just imagine having 2 caregivers, 2 parents with all these kids. They're impossible to watch for, and they will do things happen. And just to make it clear, I am one of 8 biological kids of theirs.
Okay.
But we suffered more because I heard him telling her one day when I walked into the kitchen not to pay attention to us, because he was afraid that the other kids who were adopted would run away or would feel less because we were being. And so that's why I believe that we're so close, the 8 of us, to this day, because we suffered like that. And things happened where we would get punished even worse, because the other kids were believed more than we were on anything, even if we didn't do anything. So that was very traumatic for us.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. I'm glad you shared that. I've never actually thought of that or heard that before, where you were actually the biological child of the caregivers. And so there is a bit of a distinction there in that, you actually know your birth parents and your siblings, and how they then treated you. and in your case, in some ways worse, to make sure that people felt equal. What a interesting twist on it. I mean, and I'm also kind of curious, like, how was that dynamic with the other 60 brothers and sisters? I mean, was there a real sense that there was a difference between you, and how did that end up?
I don't think there was a sense of them feeling different. I didn't feel that. I do remember one of my brothers who in a Christmas time said something about us, the biological kids, and he got severely punished for that because he said it in front of the other kids. As far as treatment, it was definitely not equal, but as far as me feeling any more or any less, there was never a question in my mind that we were just equal. Mm-hmm. But it was just the fact that we suffered more, that I had sort of some kind of resentment towards those actions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Maggie, I know your story, and I'm anxious to kind of get into kind of how you immigrated to the U.S. and kind of the role basketball played. I want to talk about, I mean, there's a lot to talk about, from there. But before we do that, I'm curious, now kind of looking back, you mentioned, the impacts that this experience, this first 18 years of your life really had on you as you moved into your journey. You talked a little bit about kind of how you viewed money. You talked a little bit about how you viewed kind of your femininity and needing to kind of balance out that masculine side. Tell me a little bit about kind of either those or other, kind of trauma that you really experienced, kind of what was formed, what was molded, programmed that you've had to unpack and fix or change, shift. I don't know what the right language is, and how did you do it?
The biggest one that I can tell you is I would always tell myself love doesn't exist, and that's big. And I had to work through that because love does exist. And it's everything we are and all we are. And it empowers us to be even greater. The other thing that was huge for me was my caregivers were non-denominational Christians. And so we were preached the Bible. I know the Bible front and back, basically. And one of the things that made an impact in my life that I remember was that even if you think about thought that you're going to hell. And I remember sitting in my room one day at the orphanage where the bunk beds were, and I was thinking, I'm going to do for 5 minutes not to think a bad thought. And then I thought one, and I was like, I'm going to hell. And so it was for me impossible to say that I would be saved even after life. That to me was very impacting because I would think, how is this possible? And then I grew up and I thought and I felt that something was off, something was not right about the religion. And I became to understand how God is, what God is. And I became a minister actually with the Unity movement, which is all accepting. And I had to unpack all those things that happened. The biggest thing that I would say that I had to struggle the most is when I came out to my parents as gay. Mm-hmm. That's when you say all hell really broke loose, right? Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. And how old were you when you did that?
Oh, I was 21 years old. I was in college, and I was very sad and depressed because I knew who I was, but I hated myself and I hated other gay people, and I was so mean to them. And I finally accepted myself one day, and I went out to all these people and I said, I'm so sorry for being this way with you. It's because of this. Mm-hmm. Then I was so happy. And then my basketball coach noticed that I was different and too happy and called my parent, my dad, and said, there's something wrong with Maggie. I think she's doing drugs. Come and talk to her. So he flies the next day and I'm there. And he asked me what's going on. And I said, I'm gay. And oh my gosh, I got beat up so bad with his fists. He
Wow.
took a Bible. He took me to the woods, and I thought I was going to die. He took me to this mountain in West Virginia where he grew up. And I remember there were trees, but there was just a mount, no trees at the top. And he had his Bible, and he just started beating me with the Bible. And I remember seeing the pages like come off of it. And then I just started screaming, I'm not gay. I'm not gay. Like, I'm not gay anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then he stopped. And he went back thinking that I had changed or whatever. But
wow. Even at 21, I mean, still, getting abused. Boy, that makes me sad to hear that you had to experience that. I know that, you've used your experience for you, but I just don't believe anybody should have to have that experience, and makes me sad to hear that. But I appreciate you sharing it. And I'm really curious about kind of the first thing that you said about love, because to hear that story and this entire story, and to hear that you've arrived at believing in love, and I'm guessing that includes loving yourself, which might have been maybe the hardest thing to do. Sometimes it feels like that is the hardest thing to do, especially if there's been abuse involved. Tell me, how did you arrive at that, Maggie? How did you come to that belief?
Well, it was certainly development over time. And it started happening when I was no longer there, when I was in college. And I started to see how the world was actually different and there was less suffering. And then I started seeing myself and my body, and I didn't accept my body. And then I started just meditating and feeling this joy and this inner happiness, and thinking about light and love, and how it's so powerful that if we allow it to come in. And I always have meditated from light coming in from the top of my head into my body down through my feet. How if we just envelop in this life, light also emanates from us, and it actually changes us. When it changes us, we begin to change the people, the places, the circumstances around us, because now they're seeing us differently. Now the energy that we're putting out, we're attracting different types of people, we're attracting different types of circumstances. And there's a magnetism in there that I lived and that I have experienced and that I later read in books. But just simply the fact of still having, I believe I still had that light growing up, because my mind was super focused on peace and quiet. I mean, I built a little cave on the side of a canyon that nobody could find, and I would go there and I would be there by myself and meditate, not knowing what that meant. But because of that, I think maybe that perhaps kept my mentality where it was. But seeing the power of that and harnessing that, and then really discovering what love really is and the feeling about that, I would consider that I've discovered love to be that which it is the equivalent of what we so-called God. But even the word love or the word God is just a named name that we humans have given it to something that has such an amazing power and impact in individuals and spiritual beings. That's why I say that which we call God or love, because there's so much more than that. It's much bigger than that, and bigger than we can comprehend. And that's really the power that the life that breathes through me now. And it's really what gets me going, what keeps me going. And now I know that there's a reason why I'm here. There's a purpose for me being here in this time, and that all of my experiences that I've lived were blessings. And I thanked my caregivers for every single thing that I went through, because now I can talk about them and say, I didn't turn out bad. I didn't turn out in drugs or in jail or prostitution. I was able to turn my life around. And if there's anybody out there that's struggling and going through some of these things, that they can also make it through.
Yeah. I think what you just said, so eloquently is really exactly my worldview. Maybe that's why I feel, connected to you, is that we share that same belief. The love, God, the language, what I think is like an energy that's, kind of intelligent beyond our comprehension, the way that gives us purpose, that that's how we are born. That's why we are here. Everything you just said, and especially, and I think this is really important to highlight, I really firmly believe that everything is happening for our benefit. And I say that from a life of challenge but privilege. And I've got my own stories, and I've been able to look at those in a really positive light. But to hear your story, to hear you say that you have gratitude for that experience, that you have gratitude for those caregivers, to hear that you have seen and experienced, and this is not just like a mind trick, right? This is not like a rationalization or like a reframe. This is actually your belief, your experience is that you are thankful for what you've been given, because it has brought you to exactly who you are and to where you are today. That to me is really important, I think, for people to hear, and brings me a lot of joy. In kind of contrast to the sadness that I just felt hearing your story.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it's the greatest gift. And I think if I could phone him in heaven right now, because he passed, I will tell him, thank you for everything that you did to me. Thank you for the beat ups, for everything, because you allowed me to be the person that I am today. And I'm not saying it in the resentful way. I'm actually happy about that, because the sadder my story, the greater the impact that I can do. It's crazy as it sounds. Because I can relate to so many people when I coach people, whether it's in personally or in business. There's always, I've never come across one single person that I cannot relate to. And it's because of my experiences. And that to me is the greatest treasure that I have, my life experiences.
Yeah, because you have a level of compassion, of empathy that's really in the experience. It's not something that maybe you could really understand or access in that depth if you did not have that experience. And I think it's really interesting. I think sometimes people might say, "Oh, how can you believe in God, or how can you believe in something of a higher power, whatever?" When that kind of cruelty happens, when somebody, what kind of God would treat a child like that? What kind of God would, right? Well, it's an interesting and a little bit of a kind of slippery slope. But I'll just say, because I know that you agree that for me, sometimes the challenge, no matter how hard or unfair it might appear, really does serve you in a way that maybe it had to be to really get the benefit.
Absolutely.
And people might not agree with that, but I feel like that's true, and it's a lot more important that you feel it's true because of your experience. I don't want to tell somebody else who's been beaten and abandoned and left and traumatized like you have, raped, right? I don't want to tell them how to view it, or that it's like happening for their benefit. I can't do that. I can't, because that's not true for everybody, but it is true for you.
Yes.
And that's pretty, I think, important for people to know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And tell me, I know, let's shift a little bit to kind of your life in the US as you do start to move on. You talked about playing basketball and coming out and starting to kind of come into this, new life. Talk a little bit about that, kind of what you are starting to grow into as you start to move forward with your life.
So when I was in junior high and high school, I was always thinking about what can I do to come out of this place that can give me an edge. And I found basketball. I saw Michael Jordan play on a little black and white TV in school. And I asked the principal if I could come and watch it every day when I was on break. And he said, yes. So I started to practice basketball with a blindfold. And I remember I had a brother who had spinal bifida. He was adopted. We found him in a dumpster. So I carried him wherever I went. And he started helping me to where to go with the basketball, turn right, left, when I had the blindfold. And I was just doing that and visualizing all these people coming at me. And so I became so good that when I was in high school, we won all the championships, and the Mexican national team from Mexico City came and saw me play. They recruited me and I was like, yes, my ticket out. And I waited for 3 months. I went up to see them. I got their letter, their admission letter. I still have that letter, and waited for 3 months in the orphanage, and we didn't get a call. And then one day, my caregivers bring a football, American football, and I started to play with my brothers. And that day I broke my collarbone, and I went to my caregiver, and he squeezed my shoulders backwards to see what was going on. And he said, your dreams are over, because I broke my collarbone. 3 days later, we got a call from the Mexican national team, and I couldn't go. And so, but I cried, but I chose to believe that wasn't the end. For some reason, I was like had my fists on, and I said, this is not the end. There's got to be something else, something better. 4 or 5 months later, my caregivers took a bus to the United States to tour to get financial aid for the orphanage. And we stopped at a picnic that we got invited in West Virginia, and there was a basketball court. And my brothers and I started to play. And there happened to be the coach of the University of Charleston, and she saw me play, and she told my caregiver, I want her to come play for me on a scholarship. And that's the only reason I came here. And I would like to say that if I would have believed my caregiver, who was a doctor, and I wouldn't have played that day, I wouldn't be speaking with you today.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
And my journey through college was amazing. I played sports on scholarships. I was able to pay my education. I played basketball, soccer, I rode crew, and I ran track. And I didn't know any English coming here, so it was really challenging at first, but then I got really better at it. Keeping in mind that university hardly had nobody that spoke Spanish, so I had to develop my English really good. And when I was in college, I used to make this salsa, like a fresh pico de gallo salsa, and all my friends loved it. And they loved it so much, I told my teachers, and then my teachers had me to bring it to class. And so I did, and everybody loved it. And when I graduated college, I couldn't find a job. My degree was interior design. And there was only 2 firms back then in West Virginia, and I couldn't get hired. So I started living out of my car in the winter, and it was so cold, and I would turn on the engine on high heat, and then I would get warm, and then I would get cold, and then I would turn it back on. And that's how and then one day there's a lot of hills in West Virginia. I was going up a hill and my engine blew up. There's fire coming out of the front hood, and I just picked up my bags and started walking. And I lived for a little while between the streets and the woods, but I didn't really know I was homeless because I lived in the woods in Mexico. And that's how I grew up, until somebody found me on the street because I was walking by with my bags, and they said, what are you doing? I can't believe you're homeless. Let me get you a place to stay. And this was one of the cooks at the University of Charleston, and she got me a dorm for the rest of the time that they were able to, because the school was out. And during that time, when I came out of homelessness, when I was homeless, I came to the realization that I was actually okay. I didn't have anything to worry about. I didn't have bills. I didn't have car. I didn't have anything but just me and all that is. So I had a sense of peace. And I think when that sense of peace came through, everything started happening to me, for me.
Wow. Wow.
And a couple of weeks later, some friends that I had from college entered me into a salsa contest for the whole state of West Virginia.
Wow.
Something that I didn't even know about.
You didn't even know they were doing it?
No. And I went to that contest and it was Mexican themed and everybody came in. I think there was 15 contestants and everybody brought their cooked jarred salsas. And I brought a pico de gallo, fresh salsa. Blew the competition out of the water. I won by a unanimous vote, first place. And everybody was at my table. Where do you sell this stuff? Where can we get it? And I'm like, I didn't even know what to say because I was homeless. Well, I just came out of homelessness and I didn't have any money. And at that competition, there was a man that was dressed in a suit and he kept looking at me. That energy, when somebody's really looking at you piercingly, you can feel them. He came towards me after the people kind of died down. He said, I can see something in you. I see that you have a fire and a passion because you really love this stuff. And I've been seeing you. I'm going to do something for you. He said, I'm going to give you something with one condition, that someday when you're able to, you can pay it forward. And I was like, what is this man's about to do? Like, I have no idea who he is. Mm-hmm. And he pulled out his wallet and he gave me $800. Mm-hmm. And that's how I started Maggie Salsa.
Wow. Who was he?
I have no idea.
You still don't know?
No idea.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Huh. Well, I mean, really, again, kind of, I'm sitting here kind of in awe listening to you. The experience of you ending up homeless, the kind of immediate sadness I got that you didn't even know that's what that was, because that's how you grew up. And then, the mindset of realizing you're okay. In fact, you were at peace. You had no bills. You had nothing to worry about, no obligation. That in some way there was a lot of peace. I think that's also kind of an important thing to highlight, that, sometimes it's not the things that we think are going to make us happy. Sometimes less is a lot more. Obviously, nobody wants to be homeless, but, just the opportunity that provided you to have that learning. And then, these angels that are entering you into the competition, the man that's giving you the cash, and you're off and running. Talk a little bit about Maggie's Salsa and kind of the journey that was.
So I started Maggie Salsa, didn't know anything about business. I just started Googling, and that's how really I built my business, because I would call people who had salsa companies or people in business and nobody would help me. So I just kind of took it on, and I knew it was something special because there was nothing like it back then. And I literally designed everything, my website, my container, product labels, I got my truck driver's license, everything. And initially it was so hard because nobody knew what the product was. And the only place that I had it available was that market where the competition happened, because they tried it and they're like, oh my gosh, we want your products. Aside from that, I decided I'm going to sit down one day, and I had this long list of stores to call, from the smallest to the largest in my mind. And I started calling, and I remember it was so scary because I'd never just picked up the phone and made calls. And I got 90 rejections that day, and it felt awful. Mm-hmm. And so I put the list down and I said, okay, I just need to, think about how can I approach this differently, because nobody knows what the product is. Nobody's tried it. And at that time, I had a partner that I was living with, and she says, what are you doing? You're not making any money. You should just get a job, and I just got put down a lot, but I knew that I had something. So I kept trying, and I decided the next day that I was going to take that list and turn it upside down. And at the very top of that list, which was the largest supermarket in my mind at the time, was the Whole Foods Markets, which is the largest organic retailer in the United States. And my product was fresh and natural. So I called them and I said, hey, my name is Maria Magdalena de la Cruz Garcia. I have an awesome pico de gallo de salsa I think you guys would love. And I left a message. This was the next day. at 6 p.m. I was parked on the city center and I got a call and the guy said, "Hey, this is Eric. Is this Maggie?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "This is Whole Foods. We want to try your products. We heard about you. Want to know more?" And I was like freaking out.
Yeah.
And he said, and I said, "Well, when do you guys meet?" And he said, "Tomorrow at 9 a.m." So I literally went back to the little kitchen that I was renting and made salsa, packed it up, drove all night long to Maryland from West Virginia, came into this room. There was a big room, U-shaped table with all these guys, and walked in with my little skirt and my little heels and my little boxes of salsa with chips on top, making the clicking sound of my heels. I remember it perfectly. And I sat down and I passed the salsas and they opened the containers and they just started eating. And all of a sudden, Eric gets up and he says, "These products are amazing. When can we have them?" And I'm like, "Well, how much do you want?" And he says, "Well, your first order is going to be 10,000 pounds of salsa."
Oh my God.
And I was freaking out because at that time I was making about 250 pounds for friends and selling it for $5 a pint. And I said, "Okay, let me just figure out how to do this and I'll do it." But the thing with the issue that I was experiencing was that I had gone to banks and they wouldn't loan me money because I had nothing to show for.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't get help. So that was a big challenge for me. And I said, "Okay, what if I called Whole Foods? I wonder if they do something that they can guarantee that they'll pay me." And they said, "Absolutely. Yeah, we'll do a contract." They did a contract. And the first thing that I thought, okay, how much product do I need? Cost of goods. I need $20,000 for cost of goods. So I went to people who I knew that were my friends that had the funds. And I said, "Listen, look, I need $20,000 for cost of goods. They're going to pay me every week. And that by next week, you'll have your 20 and then I'll give you some more." And they said, "Sure." So the week came about. I made all that salsa, me and just one other person. It took us a whole week. And Whole Foods paid me $40,000 and I gave back the $20,000. That year I went from making $12,000 a year to $1.9 million just with Whole Foods. And then what happened was that because I was in Whole Foods, now I had the status, right? Now I was getting calls from the other supermarkets. And that's really how the company grew so big. And it's because I didn't quit. I almost felt like quitting.
Yeah.
But I just kept figuring out a way, even if it was scary, even if I was going for the giant.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's people often look at, well, she's in 38 states and multi-million-dollar business and, Whole Foods and Sam's Club and you name it. And they don't see how that can be them. And, what I like about how you just described that was you were just kind of like instinctually going, well, I don't have money for cost of goods. Let me talk to Whole Foods. Oh, contract. Oh, you can do that? Great. Contract. Let me go talk to my friends and tell them that if I have this contract, if they give me money, I'll pay them back in a certain amount of time. Plus I'll give them a little extra, right? That's like an investment opportunity, right? But right, there's structure to it, but you were just kind of instinctually navigating how to make this work, right? And that is really what it takes, in part, maybe in large part, to get to the 38 states, to have a business, to operate a business, to run a business. And certainly there's a lot of levels of sophistication that can come in to make it more efficient and operate at a higher level and all those things, right? But you can start with just kind of the basic step by step and kind of internally figuring it out, just figuring it the hell out to make it work, which is, what you did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so tell me then, I know there's an exit. You ultimately sell Maggie's. Talk a little bit about that.
So I met this company on a trade show and I purposely got a table near them and I admired them. They were also another cold cut fresh salsa company that had grown like I had grown. And we became very good friends. And we partnered up, and then we sold our companies. Our companies were sold together to Campbell Soup for $231 million in 2015.
Amazing. Maggie, that's a hell of a success story. That is a story. Look at you. I mean, you're smiling. If people aren't watching, I'm telling you, there's a beautiful smile on your face, and it is much deserved. It's really a remarkable story. I mean, to be in a world of the worst kind of abuse from childhood on. I mean, even that story with your dad, at 21 years old, this is only a few years later
Yes.
that you then have that kind of a success. I just give you all the credit in the world. And I know that you are now using that success.
Yes.
And immediately after started to use that success. Talk a little bit about kind of now what? What are you doing with all of this knowledge, this learning, this experience, the success that you've had?
Well, I want to say right after my company sold to Campbell's, I went back to Mexico and helped rescue 31 orphan children from a drug cartel. And we provided a place and safety. We involved the federales, the military. And I've been giving so much. Even with my life, I felt like I was going to die when we had to be armed and ready. And it was so scary, but it's something that I would do over again if it was to save a 2 or 4-year-old kid that was in a situation like that. But as a result of my success, what I do now is I'm a motivational speaker. So I've spoken all across the United States and in different countries. And I'm also an expert business strategist, and I help entrepreneurs who want to grow their businesses. I help them with mindset. I help them with tactics that I used to grow my multi-million-dollar business. So that's what I do now.
Yeah. And I know you're an author,
Yes.
Mindful Success. Anything else that you want to kind of share with the audience about, how you're working or where they can find you or any of that stuff? Because boy, there's a lot of learning there that you've had and are sharing with others. And I know it's making a big difference for people.
Yes, absolutely. So you can find me at MaggieCook.com, and that's Maggie with 1 G. So MAGIE cook.com. And it's my website, and everything's there that you need. If you'd like to speak with me privately, you can go to meetmaggie.com and we can set up a call there as well.
Great, Maggie. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Just really want to thank you for sharing this story and for being so courageous in not just your sharing, but in your life. And I really, really relate to your worldview. And it's wonderful to hear you share that and know that you are sharing that experience and belief system with others. Any final thoughts?
I just want to say that the fact that I'm speaking with you here today, I'm very joyful, extremely joyful and thankful for you that our paths crossed. And I want to just say that there are no accidents. There's a reason why we're here. And for you who are the listener, there is not an accident for you either, that you're here listening to us. And I hope that you can take whatever you've learned here and apply it to your life, and maybe share this story or this podcast with others so that they can inspire their lives to become better human beings.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I agree. And it's awesome to be connected with you. And thank you. Again, beautiful story. And we'll be in touch. But thanks again, Maggie.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.